Cześć, hello, vitam, and welcome to Pierogi to Prayer, the official podcast of St. Joseph's Polish Apostolate of the Diocese of Camden, coming to you from our historic home at 1010 Liberty Street in Camden, New Jersey, the heart of South Jersey's Polonia for over 130 years. I am your host, Michael Matalevich. We welcome you back to our interview with Dr. Michael Klein of Temple University. In this second half, we start to get more into the heart of Chopin's music, as well as hear some of the pieces themselves, played by Michael on his piano, as well as what makes these pieces unique, and the history that's behind them. Is there a particular piece that would be your favorite or you're especially fond of?
I don't have. I do have a favorite. It's super long, and forget about it. But, one thing I did want to sort of throw at your listeners is that virtually everything Chopin touched, he transformed. So it wasn't until recently, I said recently, maybe 20 years ago, that we have what we call genre theory. How do you know when you're listening to a symphony? How do you know when you're listening to a trio? How do you know when you're listening to what we call a character piece, which is something for the piano by itself? How do you know when you're listening to a Mazurka? Well, we know that. I mean, we know that if we hear something in 3 and it has accents on 2 or on 3, it's probably a Mazurka. But almost everything Chopin touched, he transformed, such that he changed the way recently how we think about all music, because we're like, hold it, there is no one way that something goes. So there's a famous scherzo. Well, scherzo used to be just like a short little funny piece that went in a symphony, and Chopin's like, no, I'm going to take this out. I'm going to make it a whole long piece, and it's not going to be funny. It's going to be kind of spooky, And so now, well, what's a scherzo? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. One thing, most students will play some of his preludes. All right, no one had ever. This is another one. So Bach wrote a set of preludes and fugues, and this was a kind of common thing to do. You write a prelude, and then you write something with it. The prelude just sort of prepares you for the next piece, and they go together. And Chopin was like, well, why can't a prelude just be a prelude all by itself? And some of them, I have to find it. Sorry, I don't have these memorized. Don't tell my teacher. All right, so some very, very short, and some of your listeners, if you have, or either you or your kids play piano, they probably have played this piece. Very short piece, like for a classical piece, and Chopin's like, you can just play this all by yourself. That's it. You're done. There's this one. This one's very cool. It's one of my favorites. It's called the Raindrop Prelude. Most people know about. I mean, if they know Chopin, they know the Raindrop Prelude. So, and I have to give you the story. A lot of these pieces do have a story behind them. So Chopin had tuberculosis. The odd thing is, what people knew about tuberculosis, this isn't odd, in the 19th century, they had no idea. I mean, they said they had an idea. Doctors in France thought tuberculosis was not contagious. Okay, so you don't want to live in France during an outbreak of tuberculosis. So Chopin had a lover who had a man's pen name so she could publish. Her male name was George Sand, but she was a woman. And Chopin fell in love with her, she fell in love with him. And she said, you know what's good for tuberculosis is the sun, warm weather. So they went to Mallorca. This is one of his few trips. And one of the problems they had was no one would put Chopin up because they were like, well, he has tuberculosis. And in Spain, they knew that tuberculosis is contagious.
Across the Pyrenees.
Yeah, right. That's right. And so they're like, we know a little bit more about medicine than you people know, right? So the only place they could find to stay was in a monastery, and a monastery that wasn't really in use anymore. And Chopin's bedroom, if you looked up, I've seen a picture of it. The ceiling looked like it was in the shape of a coffin. And this really freaked them out. Yeah, because one of the things that Chopin suffered from, because he had tuberculosis, was hallucinations. Because not enough oxygen is going to the brain, and suddenly it creates, hallucinations, and he had to deal with those his whole life. I mean, I think about this today. I just imagine, but imagine you have this disease that his younger sister died of tuberculosis and only had it for a year, and she was young and dies like kind of right away. And then other people, Chopin we think had tuberculosis by the time he was 19 and managed to live another 20 years, and somehow George Sand never got tuberculosis, and we don't know how that happened, but somehow this is rather disgusting. But Sand says sometimes Chopin is coughing up like phlegm by the bowlful. Like he's just trying to clear his lungs. And he's having these hallucinations, and yet writes 13 volumes of piano music, and the piano music that becomes like the center of piano music. So he's in Mallorca, and George Sand takes her daughter Solange to shopping and says, well, I'll be back, and it's raining, and the rain is driving Chopin nuts. So not only is it raining, but he has a hallucination that George Sand and her daughter have fallen into a river and drowned. He thinks it's real, and she comes back, and he's like, oh my God, you're dead. And he thinks she's a ghost, and she's like, no, what is the matter? Like, wake up. And he kind of comes out of it. He was like, oh my God, I was certain that you were dead. So he writes that in to what's called the Raindrop Prelude. It has a note that repeats over and over. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but most people, I think, will recognize the piece. Which is his hallucination. He writes the hallucination like into the piece. So we get this. And that eventually gets us to this. So, like kind of tying things together, of all things, I don't know if you know the movie Prometheus. It's an alien movie. Like, it's one of the alien movies, right? They use this music in it. and it's sort of like ironic, because like people are being torn apart and you're hearing, you're like, so, even like a movie, and that's like maybe 10 years old now, even a movie like that, they're like, you know what, we're going to use Chopin for this. Like, it's just all over the place. So I love this piece. I love the preludes because they can be played all over the place. And then, I don't think, do I have the polonaises? Yeah. All right, so near the end of his life, Chopin really cannot get himself, like the last 2 years of his life, he really doesn't do much composing. I try to imagine this world that he lived in, and again, this isn't so much Polish, but I think it's everyone. Imagine a world where there's no such thing as healthcare, or like health insurance. There's no such thing as Social Security. Like, you have to make enough money to live like through your entire life. So Chopin is constantly, sometimes is like, he's very sick, but he's like, I've got to write some music because I need to make some money, or I'm going to starve. So at the end of his life, he really can't get up and write music. He doesn't know that this happens, but a number of wealthy Polish people find out that he's basically, not doing well, and they start sending him money so that he can continue. One of the last pieces he writes is called Polonaise Fantasy. So Polonaise is another Polish dance. It's more heroic sounding. That's for my sister. I drove her nuts learning that piece, and it's just, she still comes up to me and goes da 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 da. This one, it's a very long piece, and the fantasy part. A fantasy there are lots of different kinds of fantasies, but this kind is just sort of like, I'm just going to let my mind wander wherever it wanders, and however it wanders, that's what I'm going to make the music sound like. So right at the beginning, we get the Polonaise part. You'll hear just for 2 chords, and then the fantasy part, which is just sort of like, we've landed into this world. So we get. So he puts these 2 genres together. No one had ever done anything like this. There's a typical Polonaise rhythm. He waits a long time, and then you finally get, which is a typical Polonaise rhythm, like sort of like a call to arms. But right away, it becomes sort of like, almost like a nocturne. Down, and it keeps doing that over and over, where you're like, hold it, is this a Polonaise or is it a fantasy? And you just want to say to people, look at the title. It's like both. It has a very rousing ending. I can't play it right now. I didn't practice it, but it does something in the middle that Chopin starts to do near the end of his life in a piece called The Fantasy. In this piece, he puts a little chorale. And that chorale, people have sort of read as, it's like a religious chorale about Poland, as a sort of prayer for Poland, like, please bring Poland back. And I just want to play you just part of this. So we get this chorale. and things seem to be like, oh, everything is going to go okay. It's not going to go okay because it's Chopin and he knows better. So we get this little section, things start to fall apart. And he just sort of, like, I'm a theorist, so this chord should go here. Chopin's like, I'm not about it. I'm not going to make it go where it's supposed to. And we just get this little line. And this. You know what? I'm such a fool. Play that again. Is a Mazurka. That's a Mazurka. But there's a kind of Mazurka that's supposed to be sad, sort of like, this is who we are, a bunch of sad people, you know. So he suddenly everything seems like it's going to be okay, and Chopin's like, no, it's not going to be, and throws this Mazurka in. It has a very powerful ending, but then it all kind of dies away again, and so you don't have this. You have this sense that, like, Chopin himself is not sure. Like, is Poland going to rise like it's supposed to? Or is that just a dream I have that will never be realized? And so, I love this.
As far as, so I mean, today we kind of, it's such a, a distracted culture, I would say.
Yeah.
You know, people,
you think?
they can,
right.
you know, they can listen to Chopin on YouTube or what have you. And so, I mean, you can just skip through, and the attention span is pretty short, and to even think about, you know, Chopin. And now too, I mean, we listen to WRTI all the time.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, we're kind of facing this, I hate to use the word unprecedented, but these cuts in public funding, that's putting their existence in jeopardy, and just kind of this world where a lot of times when things have to be sort of budget cuts, arts are the first to go.
Yeah, right.
So I'm just curious too, as a teacher, you know, how do you respond to trying to keep Chopin? Because I mean, I think he's enormously relevant. You think he's enormously relevant,
right?
But to kind of make sure in the kind of the popular imagination that his value is never understated. I mean, what do you think is kind of the best way of doing that?
Wow. Move back 100 years from now. Yeah. So this is a broad question, and I'm going to give a super long answer, and then you can just cut it all you want and just say Michael Klein said these 4 things, and then it's a 3-minute podcast, and that's it. So the first thing, my wife is a violin teacher. And I also teach piano lessons and teach at Temple. And sometimes we'll get students who have very little musical talent, right? And a parent will say, is this worthwhile? And my wife came up with this. She'll tell parents, and now I do that too. There is no downside to learning about music. There's no downside to being taught how to, the concentration you need to learn how to play a piece, even a simple piece. There's no downside to that. The other thing is, for most students, they never interact with one adult without a lot of other children with them, right? So they're in a classroom, and an adult asks them a question, and that's it. Then the adult goes to someone else. But when you are in a music studio, it's just you and this adult. And the adult talks to you as if you're an adult, you know, to some extent. If they're really little, then you speak a little. Oh man, now how many lines do you see? You know, so there's no downside to having someone other than your parents ask you questions and see if you can, you know, do the thing, and then guide you along till you master something. And my wife tells the story of one student she has. I don't know if they have talent or not, but that it took them a long time to learn one piece. And the parent came back and said, oh my God, now she plays this piece endlessly. She's just like, this is my piece. And there's something very cool about like being able to make music. But making music, this is not a simple thing. And it's funny you mentioned the way culture is now. I see tons of videos where I can teach you how to play the piano in 12 seconds. You don't need to take all those lessons. Here, just stick your hand here and play those 3 notes. You got to try it. I've taught piano. You cannot get any beginner to sit down and play those 3 notes together. That's like a year later, but they make it sound like, yeah, you just do this, and then just play these 5 notes over and over, and you've got jazz. I'm like, do you really? No one can do that in 19 seconds. So there's a lot of this sort of like, oh, we can give you instant gratification where you learn music right away. Music is hard, but once you learn it, there's this satisfaction that you get.
This article about this trend where children that were sometimes wealthier, well off, are more apt to study arts.
Right. Yeah.
And it was the logic was, or not the logic, but it was just that when you have that sort of freedom,
yeah,
your heart or your mind tends towards that, the aesthetic, the creative, and I think that speaks to our human condition, but also speaks to the corruption of our society or culture, what have you. That we, it is that sort of like, oh well, you need to make money, and but that place for the arts and to feed the soul is vital. It is. I wouldn't even say it's important. It is vital. I think.
I absolutely agree. So my wife is Japanese, and we've been to Japan in many times. In Japan, the educational system is entirely kind of run by the government. Like the students will learn this in this week, and they want everyone to be kind of at the same level. And every public school, they're about the same in quality. I mean, and I'm talking high. But one thing, they will never cut music. If you tell them that we cut music in the United States, they're appalled. They're like, but why would you cut music? Well, because it's not math or science. But if you learn music, you're better at math and science. I'm like, you can't explain this to people. Yeah. And also, like any of the arts, they wouldn't consider it, because to create a whole person, they need an inner life too. You know what I mean? Yeah. They're not just going to be worker bees. They need to.
And it says, it speaks to what we were talking about, Chopin and Polonaise and Mickiewicz in Poland, and it's, I remember studying way back political science, and it was what qualifies you to be president of the United States.
Right.
And it was the sense that if you're too smart, you're out of contention.
Yeah, right.
Right. And it was always this kind of, Woodrow Wilson was the only president we ever had who was a professor.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's sort of that. It is. What does that say about kind of Polish culture? What does it say about American culture? I think, and I'm sure many people have written books on it, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Like you ever seen Mr. Holland's Opus?
Yeah.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
But it's also one of the lines, and he talks about it. He says, the day they cut the football budget in the state will be like something like their music is on the chopping block.
Right.
Yeah. Best friend,
I remember that.
teacher.
I don't remember the line, but I remember when he's testifying about why are you, how come the first thing you always cut is music?
Right.
You don't think of cutting sports, and I think my point would be, and I'm sure yours is, we don't want to cut sports either. That kids need to go out and run around and get energy out and learn how to sportsmanship and all that stuff, but they also need to know how to express what's going on in them. And the interesting thing, whenever you see child psychologists work with children, they often give them a piece of paper and say, well, draw something, because when they draw something, they're drawing what they're thinking about, what they're feeling. And there's a whole section, your listeners may not know, there's a thing called music therapy, where you might give, it doesn't have to be a kid, but you might give a kid like a drum and just say, just play it. Just do whatever you want with it. And you can tell right away if that kid is angry because they are beating out of that drum. Or they give them a xylophone and say, see if you can come up with a melody or something. And, they play the note. And just by the way they're playing and what they come up with, they can tell, And not only that, but this tends to calm them down, like, oh, I'm expressing something. They're not thinking that consciously, but something is being expressed that they don't have the words to say, or they're afraid to say, but they know that, oh, if I'm drawing a picture or if I'm at a piano going, as opposed to, right, that there's something that's going on inside them. So, yeah, I mean, sadly, now we're kind of off the Chopin track, but sadly, I just saw a video of, I think it was the Australian Parliament, and they were talking about music in the public schools, and someone from one of the political parties gets up and says, well, as a former violinist, we are not going to cut music. We're just not going to do it. And then the opposing political party, someone gets up and says, I agree, we cannot cut music in these public schools. It's so important for children. And everyone goes, hear, hear. And I just can't imagine that happening in our Congress,
right.
Of someone getting up and saying, no matter what we do, we are not cutting music out of school. And so, and then what happens? Then what happens is only the wealthy can afford music because they can afford to have their kids have lessons, and poor people can't. They can't afford it. And so they never get that introduction to music and introduction to art and introduction to, even reading something more literary that the wealthy people get.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, to bring it back to Chopin, I mean, he was playing for the upper class. I mean, this is all was kind of meant for the upper class. But the strange thing is, he was taking things that came from villages, things that he loved when he was growing up. He loved when they traveled to a village because he mostly was growing up in Warsaw, so he knew what like the urban life was like. Loved going to a village and listening to villagers play music. And he sort of collected in his head, this, Polish music, it's not one thing. It depends like where you come from even. Like it sounds different here than it does here. He just loved doing that. Throughout his life, he took Polish folk songs and set them so that they could be played with a piano and a singer. They're not played very often because you have to be able to pronounce Polish. And so there aren't that many people that can do that. So there is a way in which kind of everyday playing of music, it can make its way into a symphony. So Chopin to some extent was doing that at the piano. There are places where there's a tune I love in the F sharp minor polonaise, which I sadly don't play. And I always loved that tune in the middle, and I remember my piano teacher saying, do you know what that tune is? I'm like, well, no, it's a pretty tune. And she said, it's a Polish Christmas carol.
Yeah, I know exactly what
Yeah, and I was like, oh. Like, okay. And she's like, so maybe don't play it so sad, because I played it in a kind of sad way. She's like, no, it's a Polish Christmas carol. And
yeah, it was so funny that you mentioned that because I was just thinking about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of Poles that don't even know that because it's a very popular carol. And
right.
There was a book, James Michener, the author, Poland. He wrote this book, and
that book I know about all the.
Yeah, and it's one of the chapters. It ends with someone's playing that particular. I think was it Polonaise or Scherzo, where that tune is taken from.
Right,
and he's this count, and he works in the Austrian government, and then this brings up this emotional. Yeah, it's like he feels all of a sudden it's Poland, and I think he walks out of the room crying or something. Yeah, that's how the chapter ends. But it's like. That's embedded in there as well. That he kind of picked up those folk melodies.
Yeah, right,
really
right.
Wonderful.
Another one, just so I can tax your patience.
Not.
If you know the movie The Pianist.
Yes.
Right, so the movie The Pianist, for your listeners, that starred Adrian Brody as a pianist, and it's a real story. You can buy a book called The Pianist by Władysław Szpilman, who was a pianist living in Poland. So they based this whole thing on this. It takes place during World War II. The entire soundtrack, with one or two exceptions, is all Chopin. And all he does is play Chopin. And there's a scene, a really powerful scene. He has managed to avoid the Nazis somehow, as you know the movie, for like 3.5 hours. He's avoided them, and he's been okay. One time he avoids them by pretending to be dead in the street while soldiers are coming across, and they don't pay any attention to him. So he's starving. He finds this home that's abandoned. Warsaw is destroyed, and a German officer finds him. And there's a very powerful scene where the German officer says, it's in German, but he says, who are you? And then Spielmann says, I was a pianist. And then the German officer doesn't believe him. And he's like, here, show me. And there's a piano in the room. And Spielmann in the movie plays the first ballade. So this is a genre that Chopin created. No one had ever created. So we say ballade because it's French. Ballad. So we know, like ballads, they tell a story. A song that tells a story. In 19th century literature, a ballad is a poem for which we've lost the music. Like, we don't know what the music is for it. So it should be sung, but we don't know. And they can all see me doing the scare quotes, right? It should be sung, but we have lost the music. Well, Chopin reverses this. He's like, I'm going to give you the music to a poem, but we've lost the poem. So you have to figure out what the poem is about. Anyway, the first ballade, I can't believe this. He's like 24. Very powerful, and sort of like this polonaise fantasy. The heavens open up, and you're like, it's gonna be okay, and then no, everything falls apart at the end. I think he just had this feeling like I am never going to see Poland. Like, he will, never see it as a country, and he will never get to go there again. And he was right. He never got to visit Poland again. Isn't this a happy way to talk about? But in that movie, he plays this ballade, and the German officer, and this really happened, he's just stunned. He's just like, oh my God. Like, and I often ask my students, because I teach that movie, okay, you're a Polish musician and in World War II, and a German officer says, play me some music. What are you going to play? And it's weird. All of them say, oh, I think I would play Bach. And I'm like, Bach, why? Well, because he's German. I want to play German music to kind of appease him. Mm-hmm. But if you read the book, he says, well, I'm going to die after this. So the last thing I want to hear is Chopin. Mm-hmm. Like, that's, and I said, well, but you're Polish. Why do you want to play German music? Yeah. You want to play Polish music. Like, that's what you want to hear as your last. I said, remember that if we're ever in a war, and there, like a Russian captures you, and you say, hold it, am I going to play Tchaikovsky or am I going to play, Copland? Mm. He's going to shoot me either way. I'm playing Copland because I want to hear. Are you going to play? I don't know any Russian pop music. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't. Or am I going to, play some Prince or something? Well, I'm going to play Prince because at least that's American music, and that'll be the last thing I hear. Mm-hmm. So, even into World War II, Chopin is just like, he's it. he's what musicians are thinking about. And we mentioned this at the beginning. You're going to cut all this out, so I'm just going to talk until you say, shut up. I'm waiting for it. I mean, have you had a professor on before?
No, I haven't actually.
See, this is your problem. If you ask for a professor, professors profess. That's what they do. We're really good at talking. We will just talk. I will talk here until next week.
But that's, I went to university and also I'm educated, but I've always been enthralled by Polish history, but I've also been enthralled by music. And just I think that there's a problem though, where if that's not the model, if we don't want to sit and talk about these things ad nausea,
right,
then we're not living.
Yeah, right.
So it is. I mean, I am just absorbing all. I think knowing the people who listen, the couple hundreds that listen to this, they're gonna love this too. So
okay.
No, seriously, it's just and because it is, it's just this is, and it's like the circumstances of our existence in Camden. Mm-hmm. It's this former Polish parish that is now this large diaspora essentially, and but you had sort of people who came over in the beginning of the 20th century, and then you had this big group after World War II. The episode that comes on before this is World War II stories from the parish, just so you know.
Okay. Yeah.
And there was this constant sense of suffering as a nation and wanting to have it reborn.
Right.
And I think that's part of our identity right now, especially as we see ourselves kind of being filtered out.
Yeah.
It's like we want to make sure that our relevance is sustainable, and Chopin is.
Yeah.
For so many reasons, not even if you're just Polish, but because you are Polish,
right.
It's so a part of us. And it is, like, even just sitting here listening, again, I have an interest in music, always have.
Right.
But it's hearing it played and hearing it talked about and explained. Yeah. It pulls something out of me that is just a really wonderful experience.
Okay, good.
So,
because I keep thinking he must be like this guy. I cannot get him to shut up.
No, not at all.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have listeners who go to Poland. I highly recommend if you go to Warsaw. I'll just tell you the experience I had. I was giving a lecture as part of a conference. There's a Chopin Institute. And the institute is quite large. It's hard to describe, but it's in a kind of U shape. And I was in the part where people give talks and things. So I go into this room and it's got these huge windows, and I look across and I see that there's a museum. And I'm like, I'm getting out of here. I got to go to this museum. I don't care if I'm supposed to give a talk. So I run across and I used to know some Polish. I don't know enough, so I was just like, "Want a ticket, please?"
Yeah.
And they were nice, and they got me a ticket. And I went in, and I was almost weeping. Everything, so many things about Chopin. And if you're not a musician, there's like a cool place where they have little bits of Chopin on tiles on the floor, and you just stand on a tile, and it plays some Chopin, and you can stand on another tile, and it will magically morph into another piece by Chopin. So you can make up your own Chopin piece. I was like, you Polish people are really smart. Like, I would never have
defying the stereotype.
Yeah, really. I find that whole museum very, very moving. And, and I don't think you need to be a musician to, I think if you're Polish and you like Chopin, you'd find it very moving.
Yeah.
It just reminds me, sorry, of another story. So Chopin wrote most of the preludes while he was in Majorca having these hallucinations. And there's this one prelude that your listeners will probably know. Does that. Well, Sand writes in her diaries, he's playing... She's like, I just want to shout at him. Yeah. Pick one! Just pick one! They're both good!
Yeah.
But he would play these things over and over and try to imagine, which one captures what it is I'm trying to convey.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that with him too, this like perfectionism over like this music has to be perfect. And part of that is that Chopin is in the kind of the first generation of composers who know when I die, they're still going to play my music. Whereas I have a friend who does Baroque and classical music, and he says, if Mozart could come here today and see that we're playing his music, he wouldn't go, "Oh, cool." He'd say, "What's the matter? Don't you have your own composers?"
Yeah.
So because that was the culture. Once someone died, it's like, all right, we're done with Mozart. Let's move on to. But Chopin knew, when I die, they're gonna play this stuff. It's got to be good because I don't want in 150 years that some guy named Michael Klein says, "Yeah, he was kind of a hack."
Right.
Like
the two people who decry him.
Yeah, that's right. So so there's this incredible refinement to all of these pieces. Like he's thought them out. It's
that's why. I mean, it's funny too because so my wife and I can't anymore because of an accident, but we met doing Polish folk dancing.
Oh, cool! Yeah.
And I actually had an episode in I think it was April, or I forget when I had it on Polish folk dance, and we talked about the polonaise and the Mazurka.
Yeah.
I've danced both of them.
Okay.
And it's just when I hear you playing and I'm picturing the dance and the dance moves and all, and it's this full body experience of being a Pole in a way.
Right. Yeah.
And then it's like, and I'm hearing you play the beats and the dance moves and all, and it's just, and I think that's probably why Poles, especially when they came here and just in general, they were adamant about kind of learning the dances and learning this stuff, because even if it's like there's this foundational element to our culture where everything else kind of comes from it, whether it's your sense of physical dancing or music or your brain, or then you're also your sense of patriotism or and it's just I don't know, it really I've known kind of Chopin my entire life in a sense, and even so our theme music is I forget what the piece exactly is, and it's the same ringtone I have for my wife when she calls me.
Oh, that's funny.
Because it was just like what music
will capture
what is Polish too.
Yeah, you don't pick like Beethoven, you don't pick you have to pick.
And it just is. You hear the opening music to our episodes, and it's Chopin, and you know it's Chopin. You don't know the name of the piece, but you do.
Right.
And even all the because we'll do like a Saint of the Month reflection at the end of every episode, pretty much, and it's just a lot of times like to put some instrumental music in the background. A lot of times I just pick a Chopin piece.
Yeah.
And it just does. It just kind of it's automatically Polish, and you don't know. You don't necessarily know that it is what the name of the piece is, but you know that it's Polish.
Yeah, so what's interesting about that, if Chopin were alive, he'd love that you said that, because he wanted people to hear Polish music, but done in his way, right? So he would have hated if you said, "Well, it sounds so French, it's so refined," He'd have hated that. He would have wanted, And it's funny you say like the bodily experience of a Mazurka. When Chopin was in Poland, he loved dancing the Mazurka. Like the Mazurka, I have a student right now who's coming in, a doctoral student, and she wants to do Chopin. And she said to me, so true, the key to Chopin are the Mazurkas. If you know the Mazurkas, then that just spreads into everything. The other thing that many people, your listeners may already know, we used to think it was Chopin, but it was Chopin's father, because it was so common for people to be pronounced dead when they were not. Chopin's father had this dread of being buried alive, so he asked that his heart be cut from his body so that they would be sure that he was dead. Well, Chopin had a copy of this desire of his father's, and it was misunderstood to be his wishes. But as someone who had tuberculosis, and people often went into kind of a state where they were like, well, he's dead, there's no breathing, but there was breathing. So Chopin's heart was cut from his body, it was sent to a Catholic church in Warsaw. So his heart is in Warsaw and his body is in France. So sort of like his kind of grown-up personality is reflected in where his heart, and his body are. In World War II, that church was bombed because Warsaw, as you know, was like pretty much destroyed. But a priest saved the heart. Can you imagine? Of all the things in this church, what am I going to save? Am I going to save this cross? Am I going to save this? Nope, I'm saving this heart. And he kept it. And then after World War II, this just moves me so much. They rebuilt the church. They found the priest who had the heart, and they said, well, now we'll return the heart to the church. And they returned it. The Russians found out about this, and they were like, he needs to have a military guard, following his heart. So the military comes and they march his heart. And as this is happening, the Polish people gather. They didn't even know this was a thing. They gather and they're told that is Chopin's heart. And by the time they get to Warsaw, there are tens of thousands of people gathering around because they want to be as close to Chopin as they'll ever get. Which, that just, you can probably tell I'm welling up just thinking about it, that people have such an attachment to a cultural hero that even over 100 years later, they, I want to be close to it in some way. And then it was put back into this church where it stands today. So I just find that so moving that people are so attached to Chopin, and especially Polish people.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's so funny doing this, and whenever I get, it's like you hit the right chord of that feeling that inside of you.
Yeah, right.
Or something, and again, I think even if I didn't have this interest in the arts, I think just hearing it in the stories, because it is you can hear a piece of music and it make an emotion in you, but then when you talk about the composer like this,
yeah, right,
and it's so a part of who you are as a person.
As I mentioned while interviewing Dr. Klein, I've always enjoyed classical music in general. But after our visit, I was left with a whole new insight and appreciation for Chopin due to our discussion. I don't know about you, but I will never listen to any of his music the same again. The interiority that Michael explained hits on the central theme of what I believe we've been trying to do with this podcast these past 12 episodes. In Fryderyk Chopin, we have a cultural icon of Polish history, one whose entire short life paralleled the struggles and the beauty of our heritage in such a profound manner. His music gave a voice to the Polish soul. By bringing you our history and culture and presenting lessons of them in this medium is our hope to better infer your lives today, but also to help you instill the same pride and devotion we feel in Camden at being sons and daughters of Poland. As we close our first season of Pierogi to Prayer, it is also fitting to offer our thanks to all those who make this podcast possible. I've personally been so grateful for the help and support of my wife and family, as well as friends here and around the world who've diligently listened and encouraged the sharing of our show. The continual support of the Cathedral Parish of the Immaculate Conception in Camden, as well as Polish communities here in the U.S. and abroad, have likewise made all the efforts exceedingly worthwhile. The many guests who've appeared and were so willing to share their stories and expertise has enriched my appreciation of Polish heritage, and I expect yours as well. It is my hope, and prayer of course, that in Season 2 we are able to bring you ever greater programming, capitalizing on the success of our first season. We already have some fantastic episodes and guests lined up with more stories, information, and saints to accompany your journey through our Polish culture and history, as well as to enrich your faith journey. Now, as promised, we introduce you to our Polish Saint of the Month, who we hope that his story will be able to enrich your life today. Our Polish saint of the month is Saint Joseph Bielczewski, or in Polish, Święty Józef Bielczewski. His feast day is March the 20th, and he lived from April the 26th, 1860 to March 20th, 1923. Joseph was born in the small town of Wilemowice in southern Poland near Kraków, in what was then partitioned Poland. His large family were simple, common people, and despite Józef's meteoric rise in the Catholic Church hierarchy, he never lost his sense of humility and appreciation for his origins. His God-given faith and intelligence were to serve as the hallmarks of his life. His intellect and thirst for education saw him leave his small town behind for the finest universities of his day, located in Kraków, Vienna, Rome, and Paris. In addition to completing his studies for the priesthood, he also obtained 2 doctoral degrees. He studied archaeology in the Roman catacombs and became an expert in ecclesiastical history and the relationship of history to faith. After serving at various academic posts, he was appointed in 1900 to become Archbishop of Lviv, modern-day Lviv, in today's Ukraine. Bielczewski's reign as Archbishop oversaw a period of great change and redefinition for Lviv and Poland. The close of World War I happily saw the reestablishment of Poland as a nation, and Lviv changed from Austrian to Polish hands. However, nationalism and the imperial collapse gave birth to bloody conflict between Poles and Ukrainians over the establishment of borders. Through these times of uncertainty, Bielczewski sought to increase and evangelize his archdiocese, while as a man of science and learning, raising the level of education of his priests and people to greater formed religious consciences. He fostered devotion to the Eucharist and spurred a revival of religion in an area torn by social and political strife. He was also known for his deep patriotism towards Poland, yet he did not seek to subjugate religious and ethnic minorities that existed in his diverse archdiocese. Instead, he was a great defender of them from persecution and suppression by authorities. His sainthood cause was opened in 1944, and his ultimate canonization took place on October the 23rd, 2005. Reflection. Although an ancient city, Lviv would still be unknown to most people before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia thrust it into the headlines. This historic city, which has been no stranger to conflict, is now part of modern warfare in a way that would have been just as appalling to the occupants during the time of Archbishop Bielczewski's tenure as it is to us today. Yet in some respects, the greatest tragedy has been in this place, where nationalism, religion, and science collide, often in ways that are dehumanizing at best and give birth to atrocities at worst. Saint Joseph Bielczewski understood all too well that ignorance was the enemy of peace and goodness, the only antidote for which is education and genuine spirituality. A quote attributed to St. Augustine of Hippo reads, "The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only a page." This may have been why, as Archbishop, Bielczewski was keen to send his priests to study abroad as he had. There was little doubt that Bielczewski's travels exposed him to a wide range of people, in which he was able to recognize the beauty of every person as taught in Scripture. Likewise, his study of early church history would bring with it greater appreciation for the development of faith in times of prosperity and conflict alike. The integration of science, history, education, and faith in Bielczewski's life, combined with tolerance and evangelization in his time, is one that can be keenly reflected on in our world today. As in more unenlightened times, science and religion have been unfairly placed at odds with one another yet again. Likewise, the specter of nationalism and ignorance, made more fetid by the introduction of false information ultimately rooted in fear and greed, has evoked societal conflict and oppression that equal the worst episodes of the 20th century. Perhaps it is worth considering the intercession of a saint like Bielczewski, whose example is set in being a man of an ancient faith, yet with his foot thoroughly rooted in modern times, and with the gift of education. The ultimate lesson to treat others with humanity as commanded by God in a time when hatred and intolerance in any religion or nationality is common, may be one we still have yet to learn. Reflection questions. Too often, religion has been seen as the enemy of science and vice versa. Yet St. Joseph Bilchevsky saw in the study of science and history the ability to form a greater understanding of the faith. In what ways do I find myself embracing ignorance in the fear that it may cause me to question my faith, yet without realizing that it could enrich it? The rise of nationalism can bring forth an ugliness of human nature, especially when it is justified by religion. While loving his country, St. Joseph Bilchevsky stood with those who were marginalized and seen as outsiders in his society. How might I take inspiration from his faithful understanding of the message of the gospel today? How can Bilchevsky's attitude and advocacy of groups that were persecuted in his time by authorities cause me to see the parallels in such actions taking place in the world today? If I find myself supporting such measures, I reread and reflect on the words of the gospel and the example of St. Joseph Bilchevsky for guidance. St. Joseph Bilchevsky was keen to enrich and evangelize the priests and people entrusted to his care. How can I help to enact this sense in our city and diocese of Camden and the world at large? We hope that you have enjoyed our look through the musical heritage of Fryderyk Chopin with Dr. Michael Klein, as well as our Saint of the Month, St. Joseph Bilchevsky. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast and interact with our social media pages. You can reach out to us at any time via email at pierogideprayer@gmail.com. And most importantly, be sure to come visit us each and every Sunday at 10 a.m., as Poles and people of all backgrounds have for over a century, at St. Joseph's Polish Church in Camden. Until next time, and as we enter into our second season, saute some pierogi and sit with the saint. Dziękujemy, thank you, do usłyszenia, and wishing you a very happy Polish American Heritage Month.